Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if it is your first time here. My name is Jess. I upload videos once a week, and for today's video I thought that I would do something a little bit different because we have just had Valentine's Day, aka the Day of Love. I thought that I would film a video talking about some of my favourite romances within the books that I have read. Now, if you've been around my channel for a while, you will no doubt know that I am not a huge romance book reader. It's not a genre that I would typically reach for, and this list is not a list of romance books. It's a list of romances that I have enjoyed within the books that I do tend to read. So whether that's contemporary or YA, whether it's fantasy or thriller, that kind of thing. And often the romances within these books are just a side part of the story. It's not kind of the main point of the story, if you get what I mean. So without further ado, let's jump in and talk about the books. Now, it may be that you haven't read some of the books that I'm going to talk about. I will try and keep it as spoiler free as possible, because with a lot of these, the romance kind of blossoms as you get further into the book, and I would hate to ruin a story for anyone. So I'll just try and give you an overview of what the book is about and name drop as few characters as possible so as not to spoil it too much. So the first one I'm going to talk about is actually, despite what I just said, it is a YA paranormal romance book, and that is The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. This was my first ever foray into the paranormal romance genre. And I really enjoyed it. Maggie Stiefvater has a very accessible and fun writing style, and I loved the different characters that she created, and there are a number of romances within this story. It's a quartet, plus now there is another spin-off trilogy happening, which I'm thrilled about. And yeah, there are various romances. The main one that you kind of focus on initially is the romance between Blue and Gansey, and you know about that kind of from the offset, because the whole book is about Blue, who has known her whole life that when she kisses her true love, he will die. And that isn't essentially what the book ends up being about, but it is how you begin. There is another romance within this book which I cannot tell you about without being spoilery, but it's between two characters, and it's just so gorgeous when it finally happens, and it doesn't happen until book 3, I think. So that is like a super slow developing, slow burner romance, but when it finally happens, it's just exquisite and gorgeous and beautiful, and I loved it, and I was totally here for it, even though it came out of the blue. And then all of a sudden I thought, oh yeah, actually that makes perfect sense, but I didn't see it coming at all. But it just really works, and the characters that are involved in it just is so perfect. And yeah, these are just really fun, easy to read books, and it's a no-brainer that they would be on my list. I highly recommend them. I know they won't be for everyone. It's maybe quite a niche genre. Paranormal and romance maybe aren't for you, but I'm really glad I picked them up, and I thoroughly enjoyed them. The next book that I'm going to talk about is another YA, and it is Scythe by Neil Shusterman. And again, the romance that is in this book is a super back burner, slow developing romance. You do see it coming from quite far off, but when it happens, again, it's not even a main part of the story, but once it has evolved and developed, you just end up being so here for it. And in the final book, which is called The Toll, which I have just read in January and absolutely adored, I was in floods of tears by the end, just gonna say that. So again, I won't tell you which characters the romance is between, but it just develops so beautifully and so slowly. And I think you'll notice a theme with most of these books is that the romance isn't a major part of the storyline at all, and I think that I really appreciate that. I mean, I do have a particular love as well for darker characters and romances with characters that they maybe shouldn't have romances with, and I haven't actually picked any books with that in. I'm trying to think now, maybe like The Darkling in the Grisha trilogy. That's one where you know that your main character shouldn't like the Darkling, but you just like the Darkling because he's so darn delicious. But that's a tangent. Yeah, so the romance is not a major part of this story. This is basically a YA dystopian where all the world's knowledge has been coalesced into something called the Thunderhead. because the world is now managed with one system, there is no more famine, there is no more disease, there is no more illness, people do not die. And so in order to manage the world's population, there are a group of people known as scythes. And scythes, their job is literally to eliminate a certain number of people in a year. And we are following 2 apprentice scythes in this book. And as I said, I finished this trilogy now. It was so good. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I would highly recommend it. As with the Raven Boys, this is so readable, so accessible. If you're not familiar with YA or dystopian with a little bit of kind of fantastical elements to it, then I would highly recommend this because it's super easy to get into. The world is so similar to our world that it's not a stretch to imagine it, and yeah, just really loved it. But the romance for me, I didn't realise how much I was rooting for the romance until I got to the final book. And yeah, then I realised I was really affected by it because I was in tears. I don't often cry at things, so when I find myself getting emotional, that's when I know that characters in a book have really got under my skin and have struck a chord with me, and that was definitely the case with these. So it's another one that I would highly recommend. There are a number of themes unfolding and happening as I pick these books up. I was obviously in kind of a slow burning, slow developing mood. I feel like I'm saying a lot of similar things, and again, it's no different for this one. The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna. This book gave me so many feels. It is set in the 1970s. I really want to say, yes, the 1970s, and it is about a Vietnam prisoner of war who returns and then takes his family. He becomes super paranoid and he takes his family up to eke a living in Alaska, and Alaska is a very harsh and unforgiving landscape, and you kind of go on this journey with this family, but within that there is a romance between the daughter Lenny and another young boy who is living in Alaska called Matthew. And it's a heartbreaking and difficult and moving novel on its own, without adding in the complication of young love and a relationship that impacts and alters the course of a young person's life forever. It's just, again, as with all these books that I've picked, the romance is not the main element, but it is kind of at the heart of what happens and how the story develops and the turns and the twists that Lenny's life particularly takes. And there is a moment at the end of this book when it is just so poignant and so moving and so beautiful, and everything just kind of comes together, and it just, it gave me so many feels. I mean, as I said, even if you aren't interested in romance, just this book on its own is fantastic. It wasn't without its flaws. It's probably not my favourite Kristen Hanna book ever, but it's a very good book. And yeah, if you like things to kind of come together in the end and for your romances to have a happy-ish ending, then this is one that I would recommend. I say happy-ish because I don't really think anything about this book is particularly joyful or particularly happy or cushy, but yeah, just a very moving story with a young romance in it. So I've given myself eyebrows today, and I don't know how I feel about it. I normally have no eyebrows, and I feel really self-conscious about it. I feel like I've got 2 little caterpillars kind of just on the top, just above my eyes. I don't know, what do we think? Can I do eyebrows? I can't stop doing this, like, oh hi, eyebrows. Oh my word. Next up is a book that, again, is not a book that I would typically choose to pick up. Not a huge fan of Insta Love, which kind of forms the basis of this book, but I was just so pleasantly and thoroughly surprised by how much I enjoyed it, and that is When Dimple Met Rishi by Sanjay Menon. So this book came to my attention when it kind of exploded onto the scene of the book community. It's definitely not something I would pick up. Contemporary YA is not a genre that speaks to me because I tend to find it quite angsty, and I have limited amounts of patience for angsty characters. I know that when you are a teenager, it just speaks to you, doesn't it? But as a 30-something-year-old mother of 2 with 1 child on the cusp of becoming a teenager, I just have very limited patience for other people's emotional angst, and because I read to escape, it's just not my jam. But so I don't often pick up, that's all to say, I don't often pick up contemporary YA, and this is a contemporary YA, but it's just, there's just something about it that is so lovely and so gorgeous and so enjoyable, and I absolutely flew through it, and it just gave me all the happy emotions at the end, and I just felt all fuzzy and warm inside, and I often recommend it to people who just want a quick, fun, easy, light-hearted, heartwarming read. So the basic premise is that we have got Dimple, and her main aim in life is to escape the traditional future that her parents want her to have. They want her to meet someone, they want her to get married and have babies, and she wants to work in, I think, computers. I really want to say technology or computers. And then Rishi is also of American Indian heritage, and he wants to meet someone and fall in love. He is a romantic. So one summer, Dimple's parents agree to let her go to a techie summer camp, and she thinks that maybe they are beginning to see things from her perspective. Little does she know that she is being set up, because also there will be Rishi, and he is going with the sole purpose of bumping into Dimple and convincing her to fall in love with him, and they're going to have an arranged marriage, and it's all going to be super peachy, and obviously, as you might expect, things do not run necessarily smoothly. You do kind of have to take this book with a pinch of salt. It's almost like a rom-com in book form, so there are some things that you think actually in reality that probably wouldn't happen like that, but if you can suspend all of that and just read it purely for enjoyment purposes, then I think that you will find it very, very enjoyable. I certainly did. Yeah, as I said, it just is a very heartwarming, funny, easy book to pick up, and I definitely had to include it on this list. The next book that I'm going to talk about appears on lists for everything because it's just one of my favourite books ever, and that is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. I will literally fit this into any category, any genre, any favourites of anything ever, because it's fantastic. Never get bored of recommending it to people, and this again has got a number of different romances in it, but the one romance that I'm kind of talking about never actually comes to proper fruition. It's just kind of something that you become gradually aware of as this book and then Crooked Kingdom, the follow-up, develops, but man was I here for it, and I kind of cottoned onto it pretty quickly about the two characters that I'm talking about, and I just was willing them to kind of wake up and get together and move on with their lives from basically day dot. Can't really say too much about it without making it really spoilery, but if you've read them and you know who I'm talking about, then you get it. But yeah, this is YA. It's about an impossible heist and a group of outcasts who are basically given the opportunity to make their fortune and change their lives forever if they can complete this heist. There is magic, there is complications, there is love and lust and frustrations, there are dark, morally grey characters, there is a criminal underworld, there's just all kinds of things going on, and it's just brilliantly executed as a book. I flew through them. I was totally absorbed. I love fantasy. Fantasy is probably my favourite genre ever, but this was just so well done. It was really accessible. It's one of the books that I recommend for people when they say, I want to read fantasy but I'm afraid to read fantasy, but this one definitely ticks the boxes for an entry-level fantasy book, because you have the magic systems and you have the fantastical elements, but they're not difficult to get your head around, and they just make sense. So if you've never picked these up and you want to kind of dip your toe into the world of fantasy, then I would definitely recommend it. The characters are so lovable, they're so unique and diverse and different, and yeah, Kaz my heart forever. Never mind the romance in this book. I think I'm in love with this book, so maybe that's the romance. But yeah, another one that I would definitely recommend, and that has a few different romances in it, which I think will appeal to a variety of people. But for me, I wish I could say, but honestly, there is a scene in the last chapter of the second book, and it would just spoil so much if you haven't read it, and I wish I could say who it was, but yeah, I was just utterly here for it, and yeah, eventually it happened. And then I'm gonna take a total sidestep for this last book, because it's not so much a romance as it is a relationship, but I cannot talk about a relationship that I have loved and shipped and been there for, and just felt heartbroken over without talking about this particular relationship, and that of course is the relationship between Fitz and the Fool. These books are another set of books that I will just insert into every conversation about books ever, because I never get tired of recommending them. So it's Assassins Apprentice by Robin Hobb. This is the first book in the first series about Fitz and the Fool. There are various different trilogies in which they feature, and their relationship is just one of long-standing. You know, there is disagreement, there is mistrust, there is heartache, but there is also hope and resilience and purity and love and passion, and there is just the relationship as you watch it develop between Fitz and the Fool, and then as you watch it change and alter, as they both kind of go on their own individual journeys and their journey together. It's just magical and magnificent, and yet at times it is incredibly frustrating. It's also really heart-wrenching, but there is just something so wonderful about it, and I can never ever get enough of it. And if you watched one of my recent videos, I talked about doing a reread of these because I've never read the final 2 books in the final trilogy about Fitz and the Fool, and I would really like to see how their story concludes. I think that it's going to be very emotional and very hard-hitting, but everything that I have read suggests that it's also going to be totally fitting, and just put that beautiful full stop at the end of their story, and I'm very excited to do that. But yeah, if you like character-driven novels, if it's not plot-driven in the slightest, it's all about the characters and it's all about the long haul with these characters. You know, you are going with them on a journey, and if that's not the kind of thing that floats your boat, then I think you will ultimately get bored with these books. But if character-driven novels with a fantastical twist to them sound like the kind of thing that you would be interested in, then I would definitely recommend giving at least the first trilogy a go and seeing how you feel. So this particular trilogy begins in a world called the Six Duchies, and we have a young bastard-born boy who is taken into the kingdom and taught to be an assassin, and that is literally all I'm going to say about it. I don't think that you need to know anything else apart from that. It's just so good. I love it. It is so addictive, it's so enthralling, it's so engrossing. I could use all the adjectives to describe these books and it still probably wouldn't be enough. Yeah, if you are toying with the idea of starting these, then honestly make my day and do it. So there you go. I hope that you enjoyed this video, a little bit different from me. Next week I'll be back with my wrap up, I think. Are we nearly at the end of February? That's quite terrifying. But yeah, I hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching. If you aren't subscribed to the channel already, please do think about doing so. Give me the thumbs up if you enjoyed this. Leave me a comment and let me know your favourite romance in a book. I always love to continue our bookish chats in the comments down below. But as I said, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all soon.